A lot of people talking about the Eagles' offense, Carson Wentz, and how all that is working out. And we will do the same with the All-22. But first I want to look at the Eagles' defense. The defensive breakdown from Josh Paunil, PhillyMag.com, Birds 24/7, as he takes a look at some of the highlights of that Eagles defense that has been really standing out through 2 games, Josh. And you look at, I guess, it all starts with the play up front, that defensive front, which we all thought would be a strength, but is it even better than advertised?
Yeah, and that's the one thing that, going back and being able to watch that All-22 coaches film really helps with is, everyone knows how well Brandon Graham has played in these past 2 games. Even just against Chicago, getting 4 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, sack. You don't have to be watching too closely to notice his impact and how well he's been playing and fits in this Jim Schwartz scheme. But Fletcher Cox is a guy that I really didn't recognize how well he played until I was able to watch him specifically and kind of not just look at the ball back on the film. He did a lot of small things that you wouldn't necessarily notice, whether it was pressuring Jay Cutler when Nigel Bradham got his interception, or even pushing back interior offensive lineman into the hands of Brandon Graham on one of Brandon Graham's tackles for loss. So Fletcher Cox has been doing a lot of small things that haven't really shown up in the box score, but has definitely made a big impact for this defense.
Hey, I know Benny Logan's a guy who people were really asking, okay, how is he going to fit in? He was a 3-4 nose. How is he going to fit into what the Eagles are doing in a 4-3? He's another guy whose name doesn't get announced a lot. When you look at the stats afterwards, it doesn't look like he does a whole lot. But how is he performing as a 4-3 tackle?
Yeah, and it's funny. It's pretty similar to Fletcher Cox. Obviously, everyone knew Fletcher Cox would fit in this scheme. He fits in any scheme. But Benny Logan, I don't want to say it was a question mark, but I was definitely curious how well would he transition into this defense. But the thing that helps Benny Logan is even for a guy who's, 315, 320 pounds, whatever he is, he moves very well and very quickly for a guy that size. He does a lot of the things that I mentioned about with Fletcher Cox. I actually think it might have been Brandon Graham's first tackle for loss, or maybe it was Malcolm Jenkins. Early in the game, Benny Logan just clogs up the middle and really closes the running lane up and forces the running back to cut back into the arms of one of his teammates. So you see a lot of that from the Eagles' defensive tackles. They're not necessarily, racking up the sacks or the tackles, but they're really making life tough for these opposing offensive lines and making life easier for the linebackers. That was the big question was, how will these linebackers do against the run? The defensive line won't be two-gapping anymore. Well, even though the defensive line, their job isn't just to take up the offensive line as it was in the 3-4, they're still wreaking havoc and making things easier for Nigel Bradham, Jordan Hicks, and those guys.
Josh Paunil with us from PhillyMag.com. And, Josh, as we talk about all the defense, what was your favorite play of the game? Because it was certainly one that I jumped up in my seat and said to Mike Gill, who is that?
Oh, yeah. Well, Destiny Vaeao, the undrafted free agent out of Washington State from American Samoa. He has a great backstory. He only played defensive line for 1 full season in college before coming into the NFL. Think how crazy that is. Obviously, he's not playing that much right now, but still, just to make the Eagles with a defensive line group that is pretty deep, and to make the impact that he did, the forced fumble that he had, it was his first tackle, his first NFL sack, and his first NFL forced fumble, all on the same play. And it was a very impressive play. It really showed his motor, how much effort he can give, and it looked like he was held on the play as well. So a great play by a guy who really no one knew before that game.
And I know that if we talk about the defense that the Eagles played against the Bears the other night, that Jalen Mills was a guy that maybe initially you thought he didn't have a good game, but when we read your article, it shows that his play wasn't as bad as you thought.
Yeah, and he was a guy that, especially when you watch that game, particularly the first quarter, was not good at all. The double move that he gave up to Alshon Jeffrey, the 49-yard catch, and also just a smaller thing like the missed tackle that he had that allowed Eddie Royal to pick up 8 extra yards. But he really improved as the game went on. And the one thing that I think it really reflected on is the mentality he has. One thing I don't think people put enough emphasis on at cornerback is how much of a mental battle it is. It's not that easy for a guy who just gets beat for a big gain or maybe has a bad quarter to move on. But the one thing the Eagles love about Jalen Mills, and one of the reasons they were happy to throw him into the fire last week, was because of the mentality that he has. And he's a guy that, as the game progressed, he was better just in terms of smaller things like his technique or being more physical at the line of scrimmage or being more of a sure tackler. But that mentality he had to be able to move on, put the play behind him, and still want to go up against Alshon Jeffrey, still want to get that matchup. That mentality is one thing that the Eagles love, and that also shows up in the game.
Josh Paunil's looking at the defensive side of the All-22 tape, and, Mills is a guy that's probably going to get picked on again a lot, you would think, this week. But how did the rest of that defensive secondary look? Because they're going to have their hands full with Antonio Brown this week.
Yeah, that's really going to be a tough matchup. Obviously, one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. I didn't think Nolan Carroll has had a great game, either the first or second game. Particularly the first game, Nolan Carroll against Cleveland allowed 2 receptions, I want to say at least 44 yards. And then obviously he had that pass interference call in the end zone against the Bears that set them up on the 1-yard line. And obviously they scored a touchdown on that play. So I don't think Nolan Carroll has had a very good showing so far. Ron Brooks, though, is actually the guy that I think he had the best game of all the cornerbacks against Chicago. Even against Alshon Jeffrey, he was the most physical with them, disrupting that timing at the line of scrimmage. And Ron Brooks is a guy that, to be honest with you, when the Eagles signed him, I wasn't really expecting much from him. I thought, okay, maybe he just comes in and provides some of that veteran leadership and helps other guys learn the defense, kind of like a Chase Daniel role on the offensive side of the ball. But with Leotis McKelvin out and Jalen Mills obviously showing some signs of promise, but still a rookie and has to come a long way. But Ron Brooks is the guy that I was surprised about because I think he was the best player in Chicago among the defensive backs, or the cornerback specifically, not including the safety.
Hey, Pro Football Focus has Brandon Graham rated as the highest 4-3 end in the league so far. What are some of the things you see on tape that has him playing at such a high level?
Well, one thing that Jim Schwartz mentioned today about Brandon Graham is he's just a tone setter and tempo setter. And the energy and the speed with which he plays is phenomenal and consistent. I mean, he's one of the guys who has really benefited from the rotation of the defensive line. I mean, we talked about Destiny Vaeao, but obviously you also have Bo Allen getting some snaps. You have Marcus Smith getting some snaps. And Jim Schwartz, the way he rotates his defensive line, has done a really good job keeping the defensive line fresh. But it's also been the defense just doing its job, getting off the field on third down, and not giving up long drives every quarter, every half. And so Brandon Graham has really benefited from that. The speed with which he comes off the edge, the power that he can generate from that speed. He's a guy that really, I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later on, but he's going to have another good game against the Steelers in order for the Eagles to have a chance.
So, Josh, would you say overall you've watched 2 videos of this defense? Is it because of weak opponent, or do you look at this defense and say, not great scheme, good talent, that this defense is pretty darn good?
Well, really, you can't really separate all the things. You really have to take them all together. The scheme has been good. That's one thing that I thought Jim Schwartz made a great point recently. He said there are no such thing as halftime adjustments. You make adjustments after every drive. And that's something that you've seen from the Eagles defense as time goes on, or as the game goes on. They get better. They haven't given up a second-half touchdown. The punt team did, but the Eagles defense has not. And that really shows because of the scheme, the adjustments, the rotation, the players that they have. But you do also have to consider the weak opponents they've played and the fact that they've injured the starting quarterbacks for both teams that they've played in the last 2 games, which has obviously made an impact. So the Eagles defense really looks at this game as, okay, this is really going to tell us our temperature right now. How good are we actually? How well can we match up against this Pittsburgh offense, which is obviously has a ton of talent, one of the best teams in the NFL. So although they've looked good so far, and there really isn't too much to be down about on the Eagles defense, this third game will tell us much more about the state of the Birds.
Josh, let's flip over to the offense now. I know one of the things I said to Mike Gill when the game started was that they were going empty backfield. They had that up-tempo pace. How much does that illustrate the kind of game, and what kind of game do you think Doug Pederson called?
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I couldn't believe that when I saw it, because if you think about this, it was a rookie quarterback's first road game at Soldier Field, which is not the easiest place to play, in prime time, all eyes on him, and they come out and they have enough confidence in this kid where, okay, we're going to go no huddle, empty backfield, shotgun. I want to say at least the first 6 snaps, definitely most of the snaps overall in that opening drive, and they have the confidence in the faith that in Carson Wentz to make all the pre-snap calls, to get guys lined up in the right spots, to read the defense. Okay, let's give them a fake count. Let's see if Carson Wentz can diagnose what they're going to do before the snap, and he can change the play. So I thought it was really revealing how much confidence they have in Carson Wentz, just in terms of his intelligence and the mental side of the game, that they would come out with that strategy. But to the broader question, Doug Pederson, I thought, had another very good game as a play caller. He gave Carson Wentz a lot of easy throws early on in the game, a lot of quick outs, curls, 5-7 yard passes that made second and third down more manageable, got Carson Wentz's confidence up. So Doug Pederson, Carson Wentz understandably gets a lot of praise and attention, but Doug Pederson is a guy that a lot of people, including myself, doubted in the offseason, but so far he's erased a lot of those doubts.
Hey, you talked about your favorite play on the defensive side of the ball. I thought there was a couple to choose from on offense here, but, you're right. He has really got creative with some of the things he's done. I think because of the Ertz injury, he got a little creative with Burton and then having to use Tobin as a tight end. But what are some of the play designs and a couple of the play calls that stand out to you that you really liked?
Yeah, well, one that really stood out to me, even during the game, I thought was very neat, was I want to say it was the third quarter, and it was as the Eagles were driving. I think it was the first touchdown drive of the second half when the momentum really started to turn. It was just a simple 8-yard pass from Carson Wentz to Nelson Agholor, but the play design was beautiful. They had Nelson Agholor. He lined up as the left outside receiver. They had him go in motion back toward the middle of the formation. And then when the ball was snapped, they had him turn around and basically run a swing pass back out to the left sideline. And that's something that you very rarely see. When you see a guy go in motion, I want to say 95% of the time they go to the other side. And so the cornerback, he didn't even realize Nelson Agholor turned back around and went back to his original alignment until after Carson Wentz threw the ball, which was obviously way too late. And they got 8 yards on the play. They probably could have gotten the first down and maybe even more, but Carson Wentz threw the ball a little high, made Nelson Agholor jump, threw off the timing a little bit. But there are a lot of those little play designs and wrinkles that I don't think people understood coming in, how creative Doug Pederson could be just with those small elements of this play calling. But he's really shown that. And even the screen pass to Trey Burton on the goal line, that's not something that you see very much of, but obviously it worked out very well, and he's done a very good job of making things easy for his guys.
Hey, Josh, other than the drop, how did you think Agholor played in the football game against the Bears?
Yeah, well, that's someone that obviously kept a very close eye on. Didn't really have an inspiring training camp or preseason, but he had that drop against the Bears. But I thought his route running has gotten much better. I'm not sure if maybe it's just because he's healthy this year or if there's a particular technique that he's worked on. But I think it really comes down to he's healthy, he's more confident. His route running is crisper. He's able to consistently create separation, particularly on deep balls against cornerbacks. And obviously the Bears cornerbacks, especially with Fuller out, they weren't the best group. But even going back to the Browns game when he beat Joe Hayden on that 35-yard touchdown pass, Nelson Agholor, even though you obviously want to get rid of these drops, he's definitely shown signs of improvement.
Yeah, and there was another throw that you chronicle at PhillyMag.com. We're talking with Josh Paunil, Birds 24/7 in the All-22 look, is that 18-yard completion to Agholor at that 2-minute drill. He makes a lot of plays that just seem like they're effortless, and we kind of almost are taking them for granted that, hey, there's an 18-yard completion because you see it happen against you during the Kelly era so often, and now you're seeing them on the opposite side of your quarterback just doing a little simple pitch and catch.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing is, the promising thing is making those tough plays look easy. That 18-yard catch that you referenced during the 2-minute drill at the end of the first half, that was one where he had to leave his feet, go up and get it in between 3 defenders. And, that's something that you want and expect a receiver to make, but just making it look effortless and going out and actually executing, making those plays. That's obviously something that the Eagles weren't able to count on last year, was the Eagles making plays that they should make. But Nelson Agholor, even though he has obviously made some notable mistakes, he's definitely made significant strides. And that 18-yard catch that you mentioned definitely is one sign of that.
Talking with Josh Paunil here, Birds 24/7. So give me your thoughts, as a whole, the wide receiving core, how they've played through 2 games. Because Matthews has had some good numbers. Agholor has had some good numbers. To you, are you intrigued, encouraged by the ceiling for this group?
Yeah, I think with the wide receivers, I have a similar attitude as I do toward the rest of the team, kind of cautiously optimistic with what to expect from this group. Obviously, Jordan Matthews has had some, pretty high highs and pretty low lows. It's definitely been a roller coaster ride for him with all the drops he's had. He's had at least 3 drops so far in the first 2 games of the season, including that 1 drop touchdown pass in Chicago. But he's also played very well. He leads the team in catches with 13. He has 185 yards through 2 games. Obviously has a touchdown. And the routes that he's running, similar to Nelson Agholor, I think Jordan Matthews, some of the routes that he's run have been excellent. And when the offensive line gives Carson Wentz enough time, it is very, very difficult to defend some of these routes Jordan Matthews is running. Not just because of how well he's running the route, but also because of how Doug Pederson diagrams the play and really sets up his guys for success. So Jordan Matthews, despite the drop, definitely has had some very good plays early on this season.
Josh, also the tight end, Trey Burton, you mentioned the play. I really like that play down on the goal line, as you mentioned, the kind of that tight end screen there. But what stood out about him? Because I'm intrigued by him because of a lot of following guys like yourself at training camp would talk about how this guy kind of stood out. So what stood out about him when the lights were on for real?
Well, really, it wasn't too big for him. It really was his first, I don't want to say his first real NFL game because obviously he's played before, but he hasn't had nearly this big of a role before. And he's a guy that, as you mentioned, we were all wondering, how are the Eagles going to get this guy involved? Because he was playing well every single day in training camp. And so he's a guy that clearly Doug Pederson had to figure out a way to get involved. With Zach Ertz going down, it opened up the door for him. And Trey Burton, he had the second most catches of anyone on this team against the Bears. 5 catches, 49 yards, 1 touchdown. And even though he obviously has some room to grow in his run blocking and his route running, he has progressed a lot in terms, specifically with the route running. He really turned into a third down target for Carson Wentz. I believe there were a couple of third and longs where Trey Burton actually converted for Carson Wentz. And so that was the big question going into the game was, okay, Carson Wentz lost his security blanket in Zach Ertz. What's he going to do? Well, it turns out you can just rely on Zach Ertz's replacement and Trey Burton. Obviously, again, still has a lot of room to grow, but was definitely promising and will still be a contributor to this offense even after Zach Ertz returns from injury.
Josh, the offensive line has been a point of concern for people, at least going into the season now after 2 games. How do you think they looked in Chicago, and how do they move forward going from here?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think 2 guys that really stood out to me in Chicago were Lane Johnson and Alan Barber. And obviously Barber was one of the big question marks coming into this season at left guard, but they've both played well. Lane Johnson's played something like 83 pass blocking snaps this season, given up just 3 hurries, which is a very, very good mark. Alan Barber has been similarly good in pass protection. They've also been good in the run game. But the tough thing is you're going to have Lane Johnson presumably missing time after the bye week, after his appeal is heard. And the thing with Alan Barber, he's most comfortable at guard rather than tackle, and he's more comfortable on the left side than the right side. So that means he's moving from left guard, his most comfortable position, to right tackle, his least comfortable position. So you wonder how much of his success will translate, and then also who's going to replace him at left guard. Is it going to be Isaac Seumalo, Stefan Wisniewski? Those guys are both question marks. And then Jason Kelsey, he hasn't been playing very well early on this season. So although as a whole they've been playing well, despite Jason Kelsey in the run game, going forward there are question marks with Lane Johnson presumably out.
Hey, Josh, you've been watching them on tape the last couple of years. How much more disciplined and clean is this team than the Kelly teams?
That's a good question, and that's something that, I don't have to remind you about this last year, how many penalties the offensive line committed. And, especially Jason Kelsey, he had those back-to-back penalties. But that's one thing that you're really able to practice, and that's something that I think doesn't get talked about enough, is just the change of how the team practices. Now they're able to go in. They don't just wait, as they did under Chip Kelly, to fix mistakes in the film room after they're off the field. Now Doug Pederson and the coaches are very involved during the actual practice session on the field. If a guy makes a mistake, they'll stop him, make sure he understands what he did wrong, and correct it on the very next snap. And I know that sounds basic, but that's not how it was in the Chip Kelly era. So I think just the change of practice methods have really worked out so far for the Eagles. Now we'll see if they last, but at least so far, the changes that Doug Pederson has brought has made a significant impact.
That and just how much more creative, I guess, the offense is. You probably watch a tape last year and see the same 8 to 9 plays over and over again. How much more in depth this offense seems to be.
And that's the crazy thing is, if you think back to when Chip Kelly came to Philadelphia, words like innovator or genius or all kinds of things like that would suggest that, you're just never going to know what's coming. And obviously it worked out the opposite. And when Doug Pederson came to Philadelphia, it was, he's just going to be Andy 2.0. We know what to expect. He's not going to do anything too crazy. But Doug Pederson has been creative so far. We mentioned the screen earlier on the goal line, which has been a 3 tight end set with the extra offensive lineman on the field, the Nelson Agholor motion play. But you really haven't seen much yet in terms of his creativity, because once Carson Wentz gets more comfortable in this offense, once everybody just gets more communication and chemistry down, and just naturally as the season progresses, Doug Pederson will open up the playbook more. I'm very much looking forward to Doug Pederson opening up these zone read option plays. Not necessarily just because Carson Wentz will run the ball a couple of times, but to me, the best part of the zone read isn't Carson Wentz running the ball. It's just the threat of it, because then you take a run defender out of the play, or maybe you have Carson Wentz not just keep the ball, but maybe you set up a little screen attached to it. That's another thing the Eagles have been doing a lot of, those package plays, run pass options. You can either hand the ball off or do a little bubble screen. So although he's definitely shown some of his creativity, I definitely think he has a lot more in the bag, and they're just scratching the surface in terms of that.
Josh Paunil with us here, looks at the All-22 over at PhillyMag.com. Birds 24/7, Eagles and the Steelers this Sunday, 4:25 here at Live on your home for Eagles football, 97.3 ESPN. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks for having me, Mike.